I never meant to find that letter. If I hadn't dropped my phone behind Mom's antique desk while cleaning the study, I might have gone on believing their lies for years. But there it was, peeking out from a stack of papers as I reached for my phone, a bank notice about their mortgage refinancing. My name is Harper, and up until that moment, I thought I understood my place in our family. I was the artistic one, the dreamer, the disappointment. My brother Ryan was the golden child, the entrepreneur, the one who could do no wrong. But this letter? This changed everything. $200,000? I whispered, my hands shaking as I read the document. The refinancing date matched perfectly with when Ryan had opened his second store location. All those times my parents had told me they couldn't help with my art school tuition because times were tight, they'd been funneling money into my brother's business. The front door clicked open and I heard my mother's voice floating down the hallway. "Harper, are you still cleaning in there?" I quickly shoved the letter back where I'd found it, my heart pounding. "Yeah, Mom. Almost done." She appeared in the doorway, perfectly put together as always, her critical gaze sweeping the room. "Don't forget to dust the bookshelves. You know how your father gets about his books." "Sure thing," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, have you heard from Ryan lately? How's the new store doing?" Something flickered across her face. Worry, maybe? Before she smiled. "Oh, you know your brother. He's always so busy these days, barely has time to call. But I'm sure everything's fine." Everything was not fine. I'd seen Ryan's store last week, and it had been empty except for 2 elderly customers browsing the clearance section. But Mom would never admit that her precious son might be struggling. That evening, I called my grandmother Evelyn. She'd always been the only one who really saw me, who believed in my art. "Grandma, you won't believe what I found," I started, then spilled everything about the letter. "Oh, sweetheart," she sighed. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Your parents. They've always had different standards for you and Ryan." "Different standards?" I laughed bitterly. "They've mortgaged their future for him while telling me I need to be more practical about mine. They've been lying to me for months." "Years," Grandma Evelyn corrected gently. "They've been treating you differently for years. The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" I glanced at my sketchbook, filled with designs for my final portfolio. My professors had been praising my work, hinting at connections they could make for me after graduation. But my parents had been pushing harder lately for me to be realistic and help out at Ryan's store. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm tired of being the family afterthought." "Then maybe it's time to show them exactly what they've been overlooking," Grandma said. Her voice taking on that tone she used to get when she was still teaching, the one that meant she had a plan. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Hey sis, need a favor. Can you cover some shifts at the store next week? Just temporary, promise." I stared at the message, feeling something shift inside me. All those years of being the good daughter, of accepting less, of staying quiet, they ended today. "Actually, Grandma," I said, a new resolve strengthening my voice, "I think I know exactly what I need to do." As I hung up the phone, another text from Ryan came through. "Mom and Dad said you're not too busy with school stuff. Please? I really need the help." I put my phone down without responding. They had no idea what was coming. But they were about to learn that their artistic daughter had inherited more than just Grandma's creativity. I'd inherited her spine too. Sunday family dinners had always been a performance, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was because I knew about the mortgage, or maybe it was the way Ryan kept checking his phone under the table, his face getting paler with each glance. "Harper, did you hear me?" Mom's voice cut through my thoughts. "I asked how your classes are going." I pushed my peas around the plate, buying time. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. Professor Martinez thinks my portfolio could get me an internship at Collins Design Group this summer." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and Mom's smile became fixed, the kind she wore when dealing with difficult customers at her boutique. Honey, she started, using that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate, we've talked about this. Your little drawings are a wonderful hobby, but they're not little drawings, I interrupted, my voice stronger than I expected. They're professional designs, and Collins is one of the top firms in the country. Ryan snorted. Come on, sis. You really think you can make it in that world? It's cutthroat out there. Unlike your business, which is doing so well. The words slipped out before I could stop them. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Ryan's face flushed red, and Dad put down his fork with a sharp clink. That was uncalled for, Dad said. Your brother is building something real, something sustainable. He's taking risks, showing initiative. And what am I doing? I challenged, thinking of the mortgage document hidden in the study. Wasting my time. Throwing away my potential. Mom reached across the table, trying to pat my hand. I pulled away. We just want what's best for you, sweetheart. In fact, your father and I were thinking, maybe you could take a break from school, help Ryan out at the store for a while. Get some real-world experience. Pieces clicked into place, Ryan's desperate text messages, my parents' sudden interest in my education. They weren't just dismissing my dreams, they were trying to derail them completely. I had lunch with Grandma Evelyn yesterday, I said carefully, watching their reactions. She told me an interesting story about when she wanted to go to college. Mom's face tightened. Harper, that was a different time. Was it? 'Cause it sounds pretty familiar. Family pressuring her to take the practical route, ignoring what she wanted, what she was good at. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. But here's the difference, I'm not giving in like she did. Sit down, Dad ordered. We're not done discussing this. Actually, we are. I grabbed my bag from the counter. And Ryan? Next time you need someone to cover your shifts, try hiring actual employees instead of manipulating your sister. Ryan's phone buzzed again, and this time I caught a glimpse of the screen, a gambling app notification. Interesting. Harper Quinn, if you walk out that door, Mom started. You'll what? Cut me off? Good luck with that. I know about the mortgage, by the way. A real sustainable business plan you've got there. The shocked silence that followed me out was almost worth years of being the family disappointment. Almost. In my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed Grandma Evelyn. How'd it go? She asked, not bothering with hello. About as well as your college announcement in '65, I said, managing a weak laugh. But I did notice something interesting. Ryan's got a gambling app on his phone. Ah. Grandma's voice took on that thoughtful tone I knew so well. That would explain a few things. Come over tomorrow after your classes. I think it's time I showed you some old family documents I've been keeping safe. As I drove away from my parents' house, I caught a glimpse of Ryan watching from the window, his phone still clutched in his hand. For the first time, I wondered if maybe he wasn't the golden child after all, maybe he was just better at hiding his chains. Grandma Evelyn's house always smelled like cinnamon and old books. Today, though, the familiar comfort was overshadowed by what lay spread across her dining room table: bank statements, legal documents, and what looked like private investigator reports all about Ryan. Your brother's been busy, Grandma said, sliding a paper toward me. These are from his business accounts. Notice anything interesting? I scan the numbers, my design training making patterns jump out immediately. These withdrawals. They're regular, but they don't match any normal business expenses. Keep going. And they're always rounded numbers, always late at night. My stomach dropped as I connected the dots. Casino withdrawals? Grandma nodded, her expression grim. Your grandfather didn't die of a heart attack because of business stress, Harper. He died trying to cover your father's gambling debts. History has a way of repeating itself in this family. The room spun slightly. Dad was a gambler? Was. Is. These things don't just go away. She pulled out another document. Your mother's been enabling it for years, just like she's enabling Ryan now. But this time, they're not just risking their own future, they're risking yours. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. We need to talk about your education. Coming to campus tomorrow. They're going to try to force me to drop out, aren't they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They'll say it's temporary, Grandma confirmed. Just until Ryan's business stabilizes. But we both know better. Another buzz. This time from Ryan. Hey sis, about Sunday. Can we meet? There's something you should know. I showed Grandma the text. She reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Before you meet him, you should see this. I hired someone to track Ryan's movements last month. The photos aren't pretty. The envelope contained pictures of Ryan leaving various casinos, looking progressively more desperate. The final photo showed him talking to a man who definitely wasn't a business investor. That's a loan shark, Grandma said quietly. Your brother's in deeper than even your parents know. My phone rang, Mom again. I let it go to voicemail. I can't let them derail my future to save Ryan's, I said, my voice shaking. But I also can't just watch him destroy himself. No, Grandma agreed. But maybe it's time for some creative problem solving. You're not the only one who inherited artistic talent in this family. She smiled, but it wasn't her usual warm expression. This was sharper, more calculated. What do you mean? Your grandfather left something else behind, evidence of your father's gambling, documentation that could have saved us all a lot of grief if I'd used it sooner. I was too afraid then, trying to keep the peace. But you're stronger than I was. She pulled out one final folder. This is everything, account numbers, dates, patterns. Enough to prove that Ryan's business was never meant to succeed. It was just a front for laundering gambling money. Your parents knew, Harper. They've always known. My phone buzzed again. Ryan, please, sis. I really need your help. Looking at his message, I remembered all the times he'd covered for me when we were kids before the family dynamics twisted everything. Before he became their golden child and I became the disappointment. If I do this, I said slowly, there's no going back. They'll never forgive me. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The question is, will you forgive yourself if you don't? I picked up my phone and texted Ryan back. Coffee shop on 5th tomorrow at 2. Before Mom and Dad show up at campus. Then I looked at the documents spread across the table, evidence of 3 generations of family secrets and enablers. Okay, Grandma. Show me everything. It's time to end this cycle. As we began sorting through the papers, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the greatest act of love is being willing to destroy everything to save someone from themselves. Coffee shop on 5th was crowded enough that no one would overhear us, but empty enough that I spotted Ryan immediately. He looked terrible, designer clothes wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. The golden child had lost his shine. Thanks for coming, he said, fidgeting with his coffee cup. I know, after Sunday. Just tell me what you want, Ryan. I kept my voice neutral, Grandma's photos burning a hole in my bag. He glanced around before leaning forward. I messed up, Harper. Really messed up. The stores, they're not just struggling, they're underwater. And there's this guy. A loan shark? I watched his face pale. Yeah, I know about that too. How did you? He stopped, shaking his head. Never mind. Look, I need your help. The mom and dad, they can't know about the loans. If you could just help out at the store for a few months, maybe take a break from... You mean drop out of college? The words tasted bitter. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Mom and Dad sent you to soften me up before they arrive. Ryan had the decency to look ashamed. They're just trying to help. Help who, Ryan? You? Dad? Because it's sure not me. I pulled out one of the casino photos and slid it across the table. Does Mom know you're following in Dad's footsteps? His hand shook as he picked up the photo. Where did you get this? Does it matter? What matters is that I'm not going to be your safety net. Not anymore. Harper, please. His voice cracked. I don't know what to do. These guys, they're not patient people. And Dad's connections aren't what they used to be. Text buzzed on my phone. Mom, we're early. Where are you? They're here, I said, standing up. Your timing was always perfect, wasn't it? Ryan grabbed my wrist. Wait, there's something else you need to know. About Grandma Evelyn. The coffee shop door chimed. Our parents walked in, Mom scanning the room with laser focus while Dad followed, looking more haggard than I'd ever seen him. Harper, Mom called out, too loud, too forced. Oh good, you're both here. We can all talk together. I pulled my wrist from Ryan's grip. Actually, we're done talking. Sit down, Dad said, his salesman smile nowhere in sight. This isn't a request. No, it's not, I agreed, reaching into my bag. It's a choice. Mine. I pulled out Grandma's folder and placed it on the table. Just like this is a choice. Mom's eyes narrowed. What is that? Everything. Dad's gambling history. Ryan's loans. The money laundering through the stores. Even Grandpa's real cause of death. I met each of their eyes in turn. I wonder what the bank would think about all this? Or maybe the police. You wouldn't, Ryan whispered, but there was fear in his voice now, not manipulation. Try me. I stepped back from the table. Here's what's going to happen. I'm staying in school. You're going to leave me alone. And Ryan? Get help. Real help, not just more cover-ups. Harper Quinn, Mom hissed, if you walk away now. You'll what? Cut me off? Disown me? Go ahead. But first, ask Dad about the Anderson account from 1995. Ask him what really happened to your inheritance, Mom. Dad's face went ash-gray. For the first time in my life, I saw him look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. As I walked out, my phone buzzed one last time. A text from Grandma. Did you do it? I typed back, yes. But Ryan tried to tell me something about you. What aren't you telling me? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, come over. There's one more thing you need to see. I looked back through the coffee shop window. My family sat frozen at the table, the folder between them like a bomb waiting to explode. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow, like I'd just lit a match in a room full of gasoline. And somehow, I knew Grandma was holding the biggest match of all. Grandma's house felt different this time. The usual warmth was replaced by something heavier, like storm clouds gathering. She was waiting for me in her study, a leather-bound journal in her lap that I'd never seen before. Your grandfather kept records of everything, she said without preamble. Including what your father did to my art gallery. I sank into the armchair across from her. Your what? Before you were born, I owned the most successful contemporary art gallery in the city. She opened the journal, her fingers trembling slightly. Your grandfather helped me build it from nothing. But then your father needed money for his gambling debts. My phone buzzed, Ryan again. I silenced it. Dad destroyed your gallery? He convinced me to sign it over as collateral for a loan. Said he'd pay it back in 3 months. Her laugh was bitter. The gallery was worth 5 times what he owed. When he defaulted, I lost everything. Your mother knew, of course. She helped him forge my signature on the final paperwork. The room spun slightly. But you never said anything. All these years. Because I made a different choice. She pulled out an envelope from the journal. I decided to wait, to watch, to document everything. And now, she handed me the envelope. Now it's time for you to decide what to do with it all. Inside was a USB drive and a business card for Diana Chen, executive director of the Collins Design Group. I've been in touch with Diana, Grandma said. She's seen your portfolio. She's willing to offer you a paid internship, one that could lead to a permanent position. My heart leaped, then plummeted. But, but she needs an answer by tomorrow. And there's something else you should know. Grandma's expression hardened. Your father and Ryan? They're planning to use my house as collateral for another loan. They forged my signature again last week. My phone lit up with a text from Mom. We need to talk. Your father is very ill. Please come home. They're getting desperate, I said, showing Grandma the message. They're lying, she corrected. Your father isn't sick, he's running out of options. Just like he did with my gallery. She gestured to the USB drive. Everything you need is there. Bank records, forged documents, proof of their fraud. Enough to send them all to prison. My phone buzzed again. Ryan, Harper, please. Dad's in the hospital. What do you want me to do? I asked Grandma, my voice barely a whisper. What I couldn't do 30 years ago. But the choice has to be yours. She stood up, walking to her desk. The internship starts next week. In Chicago. 2,000 miles away. Clean break. If I do this, I held up the USB drive. They'll lose everything. They already made that choice themselves. Grandma's voice was steel. The question is, are you ready to choose yourself? My phone lit up with a final message, a photo from Ryan. Dad in a hospital bed, looking pale and small. But something was off about the image. The hospital room looked familiar. I zoomed in on the background. This is from when he had his gallbladder out. 2 years ago. The manipulation was so obvious now that I looked for it. They're still trying to control me. Grandma nodded, unsurprised. What are you going to do about it? I looked at the business card, then the USB drive, then my phone with its desperate messages. Years of being the family disappointment, of having my dreams dismissed, of watching them enable each other's worst instincts while expecting me to clean up their messes. I need my laptop, I said finally. And then I need you to teach me everything you know about documenting fraud. Grandma smiled, but there was sadness in it. Just remember, Harper, revenge might feel like justice, but it comes with its own price. I know, I said, thinking of Ryan's haunted face in the coffee shop. But maybe some prices need to be paid. As we headed to my car to get my laptop, another text came through. This time from an unknown number. Miss Quinn, this is Diana Chin. I look forward to your decision. The future was calling. And this time I was ready to answer. I expected my parents to confront me eventually, but not like this. Not with campus security escorting them into Professor Martinez's studio during my final portfolio review. This is a private academic evaluation, Professor Martinez said, stepping between us. You'll need to wait outside. Our daughter is withdrawing from the program, Mom announced, her voice carrying across the studio. My classmates pretended not to stare at their screens. We're her parents, and we have concerns about her mental state. My hand shook as I minimized my presentation. Diana Chen's acceptance email for the Chicago internship was still open in another tab, unsigned. Harper is one of our most promising students, Professor Martinez argued. Her work isn't the issue, Dad cut in. Evelyn's been filling her head with lies. She's not well. The room tilted slightly. They'd gone to see Grandma. What did you do? Your grandmother had a fall, Mom said, her voice dripping with fake concern. She's very confused, mixing up old stories. The doctors think it might be early dementia. My blood ran cold. You're lying. See, Mom turned to security. This paranoid behavior is exactly what we're worried about. Harper, sweetheart, we just want to help. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was filled with missed calls from unknown numbers. No messages from Grandma. I need to see her, I said, reaching for my bag. Dad blocked my path. She's resting, he said, and we need to discuss your future. Ryan's waiting at home. Ryan? I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Is he going to explain how he forged Grandma's signature? Or maybe tell me more lies about your hospital stays. Professor Martinez stepped forward. Perhaps we should. Our daughter is having a breakdown, Mom interrupted, producing papers from her purse. We have temporary guardianship papers. She needs help. The world stopped. What? It's just temporary, Dad said softly, like he was soothing a child. Until you're thinking clearly again. Dr. Matthews agreed. Dr. Matthews? Our family doctor who covers up your gambling debts. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket. Did you tell him about the fraud too? Security, Mom called out. Please. The guards moved forward. Professor Martinez protested, but her voice seemed far away. My classmates weren't pretending not to watch anymore. Don't touch me, I warned, backing toward my computer. One click and I could send everything, the proof, the forged documents, all of it to the police, to the press, to everyone. My finger hovered over the mouse. Harper! Ryan's voice. He stood in the doorway, looking wrecked. Please, don't make this harder. Make what harder? Destroying my life to save yours. To save all of us, he whispered. Including Grandma. My hand froze. What does that mean? She's not confused, Harper. She's protecting you. His eyes were red. There's more to the gallery story. So much more. If you send those files. The security guards were almost reaching me. Professor Martinez was on the phone, probably calling the dean. My classmates' faces showed a mix of horror and pity. Time to go home, Dad said, reaching for my arm. We'll explain everything. I looked at my screen one last time. Diana Chen's email glowed back at me. The position is yours if you want it, but you'll need to leave everything behind. Everything. I clicked delete. The guards' hands were gentle as they led me out, past my shocked professor, past my whispering classmates, past the future I'd almost grasped. Mom collected my bag, my phone, my laptop. It's for the best, sweetheart. As we walked to the car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, pale, shaking, defeated. Behind me, Ryan looked just as broken. I'm sorry, he mouthed. But I wasn't sure if he was apologizing for what they'd done or for what was still to come. Car door closed with a final click. As we drove away from campus, I realized Grandma had been right about one thing: revenge does come with a price. I just hadn't expected it to cost me everything. 3 days under house arrest taught me two things. My parents were terrible guards, and Ryan was a worse liar than I thought. I found the real hospital records in Dad's office at midnight. Not about Grandma's supposed fall, but about Ryan's gambling addiction treatment. The intervention hadn't been for me. It had been for him. I was picking the lock on Dad's filing cabinet when the study door opened. Ryan stood there, still in his therapy group t-shirt. You shouldn't be in here, he said, but made no move to stop me. Where's Grandma? Safe. He closed the door behind him. Unlike the rest of us. The filing cabinet clicked open. Inside, I found what I was looking for, the original gallery paperwork from 30 years ago. Not forged signatures, but real ones. Grandma's, Mom's, and one more, Ryan Quinn Sr. Our uncle, Ryan said quietly. Dad's brother. The one they told us died in a car accident. My hand shook as I read. He was murdered. By the same loan sharks Dad owes money to now. The same ones he swallowed hard. The same ones I got involved with. Footsteps creaked overhead, Mom doing her hourly check. That's why Grandma gave you the USB drive, Ryan continued. She knew you'd investigate, find the connection. But she didn't know they were watching her. Waiting for someone to start asking questions again. So the guardianship papers, the intervention, all of it was to protect you. His voice cracked. Like we couldn't protect Uncle Ryan. The overhead footsteps moved away. Where is she, Ryan? Really? He pulled out his phone, showed me a text. Package secure. Moving to second location. Dad's old friend from the force has her somewhere safe, he explained. But they're watching the house. If you leave, if you expose anything. Car engine rumbled outside. We both froze. That's not Mom or Dad, Ryan whispered. I grabbed the USB drive from my pocket. Call your therapy sponsor. Now. What? Why? Because he's a mandatory reporter. And in about 30 seconds, I'm going to send everything I have to every news outlet in the state. I pulled out my backup phone, the one they hadn't confiscated. Unless you tell me exactly what happened to Uncle Ryan. Car doors slammed outside. Heavy footsteps approached the front door. Harper, don't. Tell me. He was going to expose them. Ryan's voice broke. The gambling ring, the money laundering, all of it. Dad tried to stop him, to warn him, but he wouldn't listen. Just like you won't listen. The front door creaked open. I hit send. Ryan lunged for my phone, but it was too late. What have you done? Exactly what Uncle Ryan would have done. I showed him the screen, dozens of sent confirmations. But I learned from his mistake. I didn't just send it to the press. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The FBI's gambling task force, I said. The state attorney's office. Even Diana Chen, turns out she's on the board of a pretty powerful anti-corruption nonprofit. The study door burst open. 2 men in dark jackets reached for weapons. But Ryan moved faster, putting himself between me and them. She's not Uncle Ryan, he said clearly. And I'm not Dad. The sirens were deafening now. You know what Grandma told me before they took her to safety? I asked as red and blue lights flooded the room. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's saving what they tried to destroy. The FBI announced themselves at the door. Ryan looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time. I'm sorry, he said. For everything. I know. I took his hand as the house erupted into organized chaos. Let's go get Grandma. Sometimes justice wears a badge. And sometimes it looks like a brother finally choosing the right side. 1 year later, I stood in front of Grandma's restored art gallery, watching the morning light play across the new sign. Turner and Quinn Design Gallery. My first major installation would open tonight, featuring pieces inspired by old family photographs, the real ones, not the carefully curated versions my parents had shown the world. You're early, Ryan said, walking up with 2 coffee cups. He looked different now, clearer somehow. 6 months of rehab and therapy had stripped away the golden child facade, leaving someone more real in its place. Couldn't sleep. I accepted the coffee. Have you heard from them? Mom's still not talking to anyone. Dad. He paused. The prison therapist says he's finally starting to deal with Uncle Ryan's death. Inside the gallery, Grandma was directing the installation crew, every bit as sharp and focused as she'd been 30 years ago. The FBI had found her within hours of that night, safe in a cabin owned by Dad's old partner, the only cop who tried to investigate Uncle Ryan's death all those years ago. Diana Chen called, I said, watching Ryan's reaction. The Chicago position is still open. He nodded slowly. You should take it. I'm not running away. It's not running if you're moving towards something. He gestured at the gallery. Grandma's got me here. I'm good with numbers when I'm not gambling them away. A weak joke, but progress. The installation crew finished, and Grandma joined us outside. She handed me an envelope. It's time. Inside was a letter dated the day before Uncle Ryan died. My hand shook as I read his words. Dear Evelyn, I'm sorry I couldn't save the gallery. But I promise someone will make it right someday. Someone will finish what I started. He knew, I whispered. He knew they were coming for him. He knew someone would be strong enough to break the cycle, Grandma corrected. He just didn't know it would be his namesake's children. Ryan touched the gallery window, his reflection overlapping with the old photographs inside. Do you think he'd be proud? Of what we did. Of what we're doing, I said. It's not over yet. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. The house sold today. Your father asked me to tell you he's sorry. For everything. Are you going to respond? Ryan asked. I put the phone away. Some apologies need time. Just like some dreams need 30 years to come true. I looked at Grandma. Right? She smiled, the morning sun catching the silver in her hair. The gallery was never just about art, Harper. It was about legacy. About choosing what kind of story you want to tell. The first visitors were arriving for the exhibition. Among them, I spotted Diana Chen, portfolio in hand. Go, Ryan said. Talk to her. I've got things here. You're sure? He laughed, a real laugh, not the hollow one from before. I'm not Dad, remember? I can handle watching the family business without destroying it. As I walked toward Diana, I heard Grandma telling Ryan about her first gallery opening 30 years ago. Their voices mixed with the growing crowd, creating something new from the echoes of the past. My installation centered on a single piece, a broken picture frame carefully reconstructed with gold-filled cracks, containing a photo of two brothers, my father and my uncle, standing in front of the original gallery. Beside it hung my artist's statement. Some things break so others can be rebuilt. Some stories end so new ones can begin. Diana Chen studied it for a long moment. When can you start? I looked back at Ryan and Grandma, at the gallery we'd rebuilt from the ashes of family secrets, at the legacy we'd reclaimed. I already have, I said. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you. Sometimes it's about building something so beautiful from the wreckage that people forget there was ever anything else there at all. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find family in the rebuilding.
I was born into what you might call an ordinary family: Mom, Dad, and eventually, my younger sister Sarah. We lived in a modest two-story house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing special really. But looking back now, I can see that's where any sense of ordinary ended for me. From the moment Sarah was born, 3 years after me, our family dynamic shifted. She was a sickly baby, always catching one thing or another. Colds turned into bronchitis, ear infections became chronic, and mysterious fevers would appear out of nowhere. I remember standing on my tiptoes by her crib, watching Mom and Dad hover over her with worried faces, checking her temperature for the 100th time that day. The irony was, I never caught anything. While Sarah seemed to attract every illness floating around, I remained stubbornly, persistently healthy. Not a sniffle, not a cough, not even a skinned knee that needed more than a band-aid. You'd think parents would be thrilled to have such a healthy child, but in our house, my good health became almost an inconvenience. I was 7 when I first wished I would get sick. I remember lying in bed one night, praying for a fever or a bad cough, anything that would make Mom stroke my hair and Dad read me stories the way they did for Sarah. I even tried faking a stomachache once, but Mom just took one look at me and said, "You're fine, Gloria. Now go help me with the dishes." As we grew into our teenage years, the pattern only became more pronounced. Sarah, at 11, spent most of her time resting on the couch or in her room, while I, at 14, became practically our house's maintenance staff. It started with regular cleaning, but over time, Mom's concerns about germs turned into a full-blown obsession. Every surface had to be sanitized multiple times a day. The floors needed mopping at least 3 times, sometimes more if someone had walked through with shoes on. God forbid a speck of dust settle anywhere near precious Sarah. "But Mom, I just cleaned everything an hour ago," I'd protest, staring at the already spotless floor. "Don't argue with me, Gloria," she'd snap, thrusting the mop into my hands. "Do you want your sister to get sick? Do you want her back in the hospital?" That became her go-to weapon, guilt. Any resistance on my part was painted as a direct attack on Sarah's health. Meanwhile, Sarah would watch TV or read magazines, occasionally throwing me a sympathetic look but never offering to help. Why would she? She was the sick one, after all. The cleaning routine became almost ritualistic. Morning, sweep, mop, dust. Afternoon, repeat. Evening, repeat again. Mom would inspect everything with the intensity of a military sergeant, finding invisible specks of dust and demanding I redo entire rooms. The smell of bleach and disinfectant became so constant that I stopped noticing it, just like I stopped noticing the ache in my arms from all the scrubbing. The constant cleaning and caretaking was wearing me down. Between school, housework, and trying to maintain some semblance of a normal teenage life, I felt like I was drowning. That's when I spotted the help wanted sign in the window of Miller's Diner, just 3 blocks from our house. I want to work there, I announced at dinner that night, watching Mom cut Sarah's meat into tiny pieces even though she was perfectly capable of doing it herself. I'm 16 now. A diner? Mom's nose wrinkled. Gloria, do you know how many germs? To my surprise, Dad spoke up. Let her try it, Helen. It might be good for her to have some responsibility. I nearly laughed at that, as if I hadn't been shouldering responsibility since I was 7. But I kept quiet, not wanting to jeopardize this unexpected support. The diner became my sanctuary. Sure, the work was hard, carrying plates, dealing with grumpy customers, cleaning tables, but it was different from the endless cleaning at home. Here, I was valued. Mrs. Miller, the owner, actually thanked me for my work. Customers left tips with genuine smiles. For 4 hours every afternoon, I wasn't just Sarah's sister or the healthy one, I was just Gloria, the reliable waitress who remembered their coffee orders. Every penny I earned went straight into my secret savings account. When Mom asked about my paychecks, I'd shrug and say I was buying school supplies or new clothes. She never questioned it, as long as they didn't have to spend money on me, they were happy. But the diner was just part of my escape plan. During the day, I threw myself into my studies with the same determination I'd once put into cleaning our house. I joined every academic club I could, entered every competition, and signed up for all the advanced placement classes our school offered. Gloria Martinez, my chemistry teacher, announced one day, perfect score on the state science Olympiad. Again. My classmates clapped, but I was already thinking about how this would look on my college applications. I needed a full-ride scholarship, my future depended on it. The day I got my acceptance letter from State University, complete with a full academic scholarship, I wasn't even surprised. I'd worked too hard for any other outcome. But I waited to tell my parents, knowing what was coming. Sure enough, a week later, Mom and Dad sat me down at the kitchen table. Sarah lingered in the doorway, pretending not to listen. Gloria, Mom began, her voice heavy with practiced martyrdom, we need to talk about college. With all of Sarah's medical bills. We just can't afford to help with your tuition, Dad finished, looking genuinely uncomfortable. The treatments have taken everything we. I got a full scholarship, I interrupted, pulling out my acceptance letter. Everything's covered, tuition, room and board, even books. You won't have to pay anything. The relief on their faces should have hurt, but I was past that. What I didn't expect was the flash of envy that crossed Sarah's face as she skulked away from the doorway. State University was 800 miles from home, and honestly, that wasn't far enough. My dorm room was tiny, with mint green walls and a squeaky bed, but it was mine. No cleaning schedules, no guilt trips, no constant reminders of Sarah's needs. I declared my major in business management right away. I figured if I could handle entitled customers and daily totals at a diner, I could handle anything the business world threw at me. We'll try to send you some money when we can, Mom had said during our weekly phone call. But Sarah's new treatment is very expensive, and it's fine, I cut her off, already knowing the script. I found a job at the campus cafe. The cafe job wasn't bad. I worked between classes and some weekends, serving overpriced lattes to sleep-deprived students and professors. The tips weren't as good as the diner, but the flexible schedule made up for it. Plus, they let us drink the mess-up drinks for free, which saved me plenty on caffeine. Sometimes I called my parents. Every conversation followed the same pattern. Mom would list Sarah's latest health issues, Dad would mumble something about bills, and they'd both find ways to mention how expensive everything was. I'd learned to keep my responses short and change the subject quickly. I only went home for major holidays. Sarah would usually be there, looking less sickly each time but still playing the role of the delicate flower. Then came the news that Sarah had graduated high school. I wasn't able to attend the ceremony, or at least, that's what I told them. Finals were a convenient excuse. "We're so proud," Mom gushed during our next call. "She's going to attend Madison College. Their medical program is excellent, and they have a wonderful student health center." I gripped my phone tighter. "That's great. How's she paying for it?" There was a slight pause. "Oh, we'd been saving." The irony hit me like a slap. After years of "we spent everything on Sarah's treatments and we just can't afford college right now," they'd somehow managed to find enough money to send her to a private college. I thought about my own scholarship applications, the countless nights spent perfecting essays while also maintaining my grades and working at the diner. "That's wonderful," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm happy for her." "We just want what's best for her health," Mom added, as if I might have forgotten their eternal justification. After hanging up, I sat on my bed and let out a long breath. The familiar bitter taste in my mouth wasn't exactly anger anymore, it was more like validation. Every scholarship I'd earned, every extra shift I'd worked, every penny I'd saved had been the right choice. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at Bennett & Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm. The starting salary wasn't impressive, but I saw potential. While other new hires complained about long hours and tedious tasks, I threw myself into every project. "Martinez," my supervisor called out one Friday afternoon, "that efficiency protocol you suggested for the Thompson account? The CEO loved it. Keep this up, and you're going places." I did keep it up. Every project, every presentation, every client meeting became an opportunity to prove myself. I developed a reputation for innovative solutions and attention to detail. When I proposed a new customer relationship management system that saved the company thousands, the senior partners took notice. The promotions came steadily after that. Junior analyst to senior analyst. Senior analyst to project manager. Each step up meant more responsibility, more respect, and yes, more money. I moved from my cramped studio to a decent one-bedroom apartment, bought some proper furniture, started building an emergency fund that had nothing to do with escaping my family. "Your quarterly numbers are exceptional," Mr. Bennett himself told me during my third-year review. "How would you feel about heading up our new digital transformation division?" I was 30, making six figures, and finally feeling like I'd built something solid for myself when the call came. "Gloria, honey," Mom's voice had that forced cheerfulness I remembered so well. "You must come visit this weekend. This is important family news. Sarah will be so disappointed if you're not here." Some things never change. I rearranged my schedule, delegated some tasks to my team, and booked a flight home. The house looked exactly the same when I arrived, maybe a few more cleaning supplies by the door, but otherwise unchanged. Sarah's car was in the driveway, along with an unfamiliar blue sedan. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Gloria, come in, come in. Everyone's in the living room." Sarah was perched on the couch next to a tall man with glasses and a nervous smile. Dad sat in his usual armchair, and Mom quickly reclaimed her spot next to Sarah. "Gloria," Sarah beamed, "this is David, my fiancé. We're getting married." Sarah continued, holding up her left hand to display a sizable diamond ring. "The engagement party is in 2 weeks. You'll come, right?" I managed a smile and appropriate congratulatory noises. David seemed nice. But something felt off. Throughout dinner, the conversation kept circling back to my career. Mom, Dad, even Sarah couldn't stop asking questions. "So what exactly is your title now?" Mom pressed. "And you manage how many people?" Dad wanted to know. "Digital transformation, that sounds impressive," Sarah mused. "Must pay well?" I answered each question vaguely, years of practice helping me deflect their increasingly pointed inquiries about my finances. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this sudden interest in my career success wasn't just casual conversation. 2 weeks flew by in a blur of work deadlines and project meetings. Before I knew it, I was back in my hometown, pulling up to the Grand Plaza, easily the most expensive restaurant in the city. Sarah waved to me from the entrance, wearing a designer dress I knew she couldn't afford on her entry-level nurse's salary. David stood beside her, looking uncomfortable in his new suit. The private dining room was packed with faces I barely recognized, distant relatives, old family friends, what seemed like David's entire extended family. Crystal glasses clinked, waiters glided between tables with bottles of champagne, and elaborate flower arrangements centered each table. The evening progressed through course after expensive course. Imported caviar, Wagyu beef, vintage wines. I couldn't help doing the mental math, this had to be running into the thousands. On my last visit, Sarah had mentioned struggling to make her student loan payments, and I knew David worked at a local library. The numbers weren't adding up. "Another bottle of champagne for table 3. Sarah called out to a passing waiter, not even glancing at the wine list. She caught my eye and smiled. "We have to celebrate properly, right?" Finally, as the dessert plates were being cleared and guests were starting to gather their things, the restaurant manager approached our table. He was carrying a leather folder. "The evening's final bill," he announced, looking expectantly at the group. Before anyone else could move, Sarah gave an airy wave. "Oh, my sister Gloria will take care of that." She smiled at me with artificial sweetness. "She's very successful, you know, a big executive in the city." The manager turned to me and extended the folder. I took it, opened it, and felt my blood run cold. The number at the bottom had far more zeros than I'd expected, even with my worst-case calculations. I looked up to find every eye at the table on me. Mom and Dad wore identical expressions of studied nonchalance, as if this had been the plan all along. David looked mortified, but said nothing. And Sarah? Sarah was smirking, actually smirking, like she'd just pulled off some clever trick. They'd planned this. All of it, the excessive menu choices, the premium wines, the endless appetizers. The constant questions about my job and salary during their surprise announcement. They'd set me up, assuming I wouldn't dare cause a scene at my sister's engagement party. I closed the bill folder and stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The restaurant had grown quieter, other guests sensing the tension at our table. "I'm not paying this bill," I said, my voice steady. "This is the first I'm hearing about any of this." Sarah's face contorted. "What do you mean you're not paying?" "Of course you're paying. You're my sister." "Gloria," Mom hissed, "don't make a scene." David's parents exchanged alarmed looks. His mother leaned forward. "I'm sorry, what's happening?" "We thought the bill had been arranged." "Nothing was arranged," I said, looking directly at Sarah. "They just assumed I'd pay without asking me." Sarah shot up from her chair, face red. "You selfish bitch. You make all that money and you can't even help your own sister? What kind of person are you?" "Sarah, honey, please calm down," David tried to intervene, reaching for her arm. She yanked away from him. "Don't tell me to calm down. She's ruining everything. She's always been jealous of me." The scene devolved quickly. Sarah grabbed a wine glass and hurled it against the wall. Then a plate, then another. Crystal shattered, guests gasped, and David's parents stood up, horrified. David tried again to calm her, but she shoved him so hard he stumbled backward into a waiter. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I grabbed my purse, walked out of the restaurant, and drove straight to the airport. I booked the first flight home while sitting in the terminal, my hands shaking not from fear or anger, but from a strange sense of relief. The mask had finally dropped. They couldn't pretend anymore. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. the next morning. Mom's number. "How dare you," she screeched, before I could even say hello. "You've ruined everything." Sarah is devastated. The engagement is probably off now, and it's all your fault. My fault? I let out a harsh laugh. You tried to scam me. Scam you? We're family. You make more than enough money to help your sister have her special day. You're just being selfish, like always. Dad's voice cut in, they had me on speaker. You humiliated us in front of everyone. You need to make this right. Make it right? I repeated. You mean pay for the bill you tried to trick me into covering? Well, yes, Mom said, as if it was obvious. And since you've caused all this trouble, you should pay for the wedding too. The venue Sarah wants is $40,000, and that would be a good way to apologize. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Not polite laughter, but deep, borderline hysterical laughter. Let me be very clear, I said when I could speak again. I'm not paying for the engagement dinner. I'm not paying for the wedding. I'm not paying for anything. And please, don't call me again. I hung up, blocked their numbers, and went to make coffee. I had a meeting in 2 hours, and I wasn't going to let their drama derail my life anymore. A week after the restaurant disaster, I was scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break when I saw it. David's relationship status had changed to single. A few clicks revealed that Sarah had removed all their photos together. The engagement was off. I wasn't surprised. After watching Sarah's meltdown, any sane person would run for the hills. What did surprise me was the post that appeared on my feed later that evening, written by my mother and shared by what seemed like every relative we had. With heavy hearts, we must announce that Sarah's engagement has ended. While we usually keep family matters private, we feel we must speak out about the cruel and deliberate actions that led to this heartbreak. Our eldest daughter, Gloria, had promised to help with the engagement celebration and wedding costs, knowing how much this meant to her sister. But at the engagement dinner, she purposely humiliated Sarah in front of both families by refusing to pay the bill she had agreed to cover. This calculated act of sabotage came from a place of long-time jealousy and resentment. We have always known that Gloria envied the attention Sarah needed due to her health issues, but we never imagined she would stoop so low as to deliberately ruin her sister's happiness. Sarah is devastated, and David's family was so shocked by the scene that they encouraged him to reconsider the marriage. Our family is torn apart because one person chose spite over sisterly love. To those who wonder why we're sharing this publicly, we believe it's important to stand up to toxic behavior, even from family members. Especially from family members. The comments poured in like poison. I always knew there was something off about Gloria. So cold and distant at family gatherings. Poor Sarah. She's been through so much already with her health issues, and now this betrayal from her own sister. How could anyone be so heartless? Family should support each other. Aunt Margaret, who hadn't spoken to me in years, chimed in, Helen, I'm so sorry your daughter turned out this way. You and Richard were such wonderful parents to both girls. Some people are just born selfish. Cousin Rachel, who'd attended the engagement, I was there. Gloria just walked out while Sarah was crying. She didn't even try to explain or apologize. Shocking behavior. Even distant relatives I barely remembered were joining the pile-on, each comment more viciously righteous than the last. Not one person questioned my parents' version of events. Not one person wondered why I might have refused to pay. Not one person reached out to hear my side. The narrative was set, I was the villain who destroyed my sister's happiness out of jealousy. The successful but bitter older sister who couldn't stand to see her younger sibling happy. The cold-hearted career woman who chose money over family. I began typing. I've never been one to air family drama publicly, but since my parents have chosen to share their version of events, I feel compelled to share the truth. No, I never promised to pay for Sarah's engagement dinner or wedding. In fact, I knew nothing about these supposed obligations until the restaurant bill was handed to me at the end of the evening. The truth is simple, my parents and sister orchestrated an elaborate dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in town, invited 50 guests, ordered premium everything, and then expected me to cover the massive bill without any prior discussion or agreement. When I refused to pay for this surprise expense, Sarah had a meltdown that included throwing and breaking restaurant property. I left to avoid escalating the situation. The next morning, my parents called to berate me. They demanded I pay not only for the engagement dinner but also for a $40,000 wedding. They never denied planning this ambush. In fact, they defended it by saying I'd make enough money to cover these expenses. Don't take my word for it. Listen for yourselves. I attached the audio file. I'd recorded that morning's phone call out of pure instinct, thank goodness. Their voices rang out clear and damning. Mom, you make more than enough money to help your sister have her special day. Dad, you need to make this right. Me, you mean pay for the bill you tried to trick me into covering? Mom, well, yes. And since you've caused all this trouble, you should pay for the wedding too. The venue Sarah wants is $40,000. The comments started immediately, but these were different. Oh my God, Gloria, I am so sorry for assuming the worst. I can't believe they tried to stick you with a bill like that without warning. Who does that? Helen and Richard, you should be ashamed of yourselves. This is exploitation, not parenting. Aunt Margaret, Gloria, honey, I owe you the biggest apology. I should have known there was more to this story. Cousin Rachel, I was at that dinner and I knew something felt off about the whole thing. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm so sorry, Gloria. Even some of David's family members commented, saying they'd had concerns about Sarah's behavior and stability, and that the broken engagement had more to do with her actions than anything I'd done. My parents tried damage control, claiming the recording was taken out of context, but it was too late. The truth was out. I didn't stick around to watch the fallout. I blocked my parents' numbers, blocked them and Sarah on all social media, and deleted the Facebook app from my phone. Enough was enough. That was 6 months ago. I haven't spoken to any of them since. Sometimes I get messages from relatives passing along news, Sarah's seeing a therapist now, Mom and Dad are in family counseling, but I don't respond. Maybe someday they'll understand the damage they've done, but I'm not holding my breath. For now, I'm focused on my life, my career, and the family I've chosen, friends who support me without trying to exploit me. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty about putting myself first. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. Even from family. Especially from family. My name is Tiffany Mitchell, and I was born into what seemed like a typical middle-class family in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My parents, David and Sarah Mitchell, were absolutely obsessed with child development techniques and early learning methods. They had stacks of parenting books everywhere in our house, and Mom was always talking about some new theory she'd read about. Sarah, don't you think we're overdoing it a bit? I remember my dad asking one evening as Mom struggled to teach me simple arithmetic. I was barely 3. No, David, these are crucial developmental years, Mom insisted, showing him yet another colorful flashcard. The books say we need to start early. Looking back now, I can't help but laugh at how ordinary my development was, despite their tireless efforts. I sat up, walked, and talked right on schedule, no prodigy here. But instead of accepting that every child develops at their own pace, my parents saw me as their first failed experiment. Everything changed when my sister Jessica was born. I was 3 years old, and suddenly our house transformed into what felt like a baby genius boot camp. Mom had even taken special courses by then, determined not to make the same mistakes she thought she'd made with me. The difference in how they approached raising Jessica was stark. Where I had regular toys, Jessica had educational development tools. Where I had picture books, Jessica had cognitive enhancement materials. Every milestone became a celebration, her first words came early, she walked before her peers, and she could solve puzzles meant for older kids. My grandparents, Peter and Eleanor Mitchell, lived just a few blocks away, and their house became my sanctuary. They treated Jessica and me exactly the same, showering us both with the same love and attention. I remember one particular Sunday afternoon when I was about 5, sitting on Grandma Eleanor's lap as she read stories to both Jessica and me. "Both of my granddaughters are perfect just the way they are," Grandma would say, giving us each a cookie. This always seemed to irritate Mom, who would purse her lips and mutter something about acknowledging exceptional talent. "Sarah," Grandma once said firmly during a family dinner, "children need love, not pressure. They're not science experiments." "Mom, you don't understand modern parenting," Dad jumped to Mom's defense. "Jessica shows real promise. We need to nurture that." I sat there, pushing peas around my plate, already understanding that in my parents' eyes, I was just the practice run, the rough draft before they created their masterpiece. Elementary school was a pretty normal experience for me. I wasn't at the top of my class, but I wasn't at the bottom either. I made friends, did my homework, and generally enjoyed being a regular kid. My report cards were filled with B's and the occasional A, which I thought was perfectly fine. My parents, however, barely glanced at them. Then came the day Jessica started school. But unlike me, who went to our local public school, my sister got a different treatment entirely. "We've enrolled Jessica in the Wellington Academy for Gifted Children," Mom announced proudly at dinner one evening. They rarely accept children so young, but they were very impressed with her test scores. I remember choking on my milk. Wellington was that fancy private school across town, the one with the huge campus and Olympic-sized swimming pool. The tuition there cost more than a car. The spending didn't stop there. Every time Jessica complained about the workload or threw a tantrum about homework, our parents' solution was to throw money at the problem. "I don't want to do math today," Jessica would whine. "It's too hard." "Tell you what, sweetie," Mom would say. "If you finish your homework, we can go to the toy store and get that new dollhouse you wanted." It didn't take long for Jessica to figure out this game. Soon, every minor accomplishment came with a price tag. "If I get an A on this test, can I get the new iPad, or I'll do extra credit if you buy me those designer shoes." Meanwhile, I sat at our kitchen table, doing my homework alone. No rewards, no special attention. Once, I got the highest score in my class on a science project, a solar system model I spent weeks building. When I showed it to Mom, she just nodded and said, "That's nice, honey." "Oh, did you hear? Jessica got accepted into the advanced mathematics program." The final straw came when I was 13. I had just finished decorating my room, the bigger of the two kids' bedrooms, with posters of my favorite bands and some photos of me with my friends. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was my space, my sanctuary. One evening, Jessica marched into the living room where our parents were watching TV. "I want Tiffany's room," she demanded, hands on her hips. "Mine is too small for all my things, and I need more space for my study area." I looked up from my book, certain our parents would shut down this ridiculous request. Instead, Mom and Dad exchanged glances. "You know, that makes sense," Dad said. "Jessica does have a lot more equipment and educational materials." "What? No," I protested. "That's my room. I've had it since I was little." But my objections fell on deaf ears. The very next day, while I was at school, they moved all my things into Jessica's smaller room. When I came home, I found Jessica already settled in my old room, her expensive desk taking up the space where my bed used to be. "This is so unfair," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "Life isn't fair, Tiffany," Mom said dismissively. "Your sister needs the space more than you do. Don't be selfish." I slammed the door to my new, smaller room and collapsed onto the bed that barely fit in the space. That night, as I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized something important. In this house, I would always come second. High school graduation was approaching, and I'd spent months researching colleges, writing applications, and dreaming about my future. I had decent grades and some good extracurricular activities on my resume. While I wasn't aiming for Harvard or Yale, I had my sights set on several solid state universities with strong business programs. that fateful family dinner started like any other. Grandma and Grandpa had come over for Mom's Sunday roast, and we were all seated around the dining room table. Jessica was bragging about her latest academic achievement while Mom and Dad beamed at her with pride. "So, Tiffany," Grandma Eleanor turned to me with genuine interest, "tell us about your college plans. Where are you thinking of applying?" I straightened up in my chair, excited to finally share my plans. "Well, I've been looking at State University's business program. There." "Oh, about that," Mom cut me off mid-sentence, setting down her fork with a sharp clink against the plate. "We'd been meaning to discuss this with you, Tiffany. Your father and I have decided we won't be able to help with your college tuition. We need to save all our resources for Jessica's education. She's got a real shot at the Ivy League, and that's not going to be cheap." "You can't be serious." Grandpa Peter's fork clattered onto his plate. "What about Tiffany's future?" Mom sighed as if she were explaining something obvious to a small child. "Look, we have to be realistic here. Jessica is gifted. She has real potential. Tiffany is ordinary. She can get a job right out of high school or maybe take some community college classes if she saves up." "How dare you?" Grandma's voice shook with anger. "How can you dismiss your own daughter like this?" "Oh, please," Dad snapped, his face reddening. "Let's not pretend here. Tiffany's never shown any exceptional abilities. Higher education would be wasted on her. We're just being practical." I couldn't take it anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in. Shoving my chair back, I ran from the table, tears already streaming down my face. Behind me, I could hear the continued argument, my parents' cold logic clashing with my grandparents' outrage. A gentle knock came at my door about 15 minutes later. "Tiffany? Can I come in, sweetheart?" It was Grandma Eleanor. I didn't answer, but she came in anyway, sitting on the edge of my bed. Her warm hand started rubbing circles on my back, just like she used to do when I was little. "Your grandfather and I have made a decision," she said softly. "We're going to pay for your college education. All of it." I rolled over, wiping my eyes. "What? But that's too much money." "Nonsense," she smiled, reaching out to brush my hair from my tear-stained face. "You deserve an education just as much as anyone else. More, actually, because you've worked hard for it without any support." For the first time that evening, I felt myself smile. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I had people who believed in me, and more importantly, I was starting to believe in myself. College life suited me perfectly. Away from my parents' constant comparisons and criticism, I flourished in the business program. My professors praised my analytical thinking, and I discovered I had a natural talent for understanding market trends and investment strategies. Every weekend, I'd call Grandma and Grandpa to update them on my progress. I hadn't spoken to my parents since leaving for college. They hadn't tried to contact me either, which honestly made things easier. The only updates I got about them came through my grandparents, and one particular call changed everything. "You won't believe what's happening with Jessica," Grandma said one evening, her voice heavy with concern. "She's completely gone off the rails. You know, she got into Princeton, your parents wouldn't stop talking about it. But apparently, once she got there, away from your parents' constant supervision, she just stopped caring about school altogether." I listened as Grandma painted a picture of my perfect sister's dramatic fall from grace. Jessica, it seemed, had discovered parties, boys, and the freedom to do whatever she wanted. Her carefully cultivated image as the family genius crumbled in a matter of weeks. "Your mother called me in tears yesterday," Grandma continued. "The dean's office sent them a warning letter. Jessica's barely attending classes, and when she does show up, she's either late or hungover. What are Mom and Dad doing about it?" "Oh, they're beside themselves. They've tried everything, threatening to cut off her allowance, promising her a new car if she brings her grades up, even flying out to Princeton to talk some sense into her. But Jessica just laughs it off." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of giving Jessica everything she wanted, my parents had created someone who didn't know how to handle responsibility. A month later, Grandma called with an update. "Well, it finally happened," she said. "Jessica got kicked out of Princeton. Failed almost every class, and had too many disciplinary infractions to count." I could hardly believe it. The golden child, the genius, the one who was supposed to bring glory to the family name, kicked out of college after just 1 year. "She's moved back home," Grandma added. "Your parents are in shock. They keep saying there must be some mistake, that the university didn't understand Jessica's special needs as a gifted student." Over the next few months, through my regular calls with my grandparents, I learned that Jessica had settled into a comfortable routine of doing absolutely nothing. She slept until noon, went out with different guys every night, and treated our parents' house like a hotel. "Your father tried to get her to at least look for a job," Grandpa told me during one call. "She told him that work was beneath someone of her intelligence level." I felt vindicated and pleased. And at the same time, I felt relieved that I'd escaped their suffocating expectations and found my own path. After graduation, I landed a position as a junior investment analyst at Meridian Financial, one of the most respected firms in my hometown. Grandma and Grandpa insisted I stay with them until I got settled, and I gratefully accepted. The unexpected reunion with my parents happened on a Saturday morning at Marshall's Grocery. I was comparing prices on organic tomatoes when I heard my mother's voice. "Tiffany? Is that really you?" I turned to find both my parents standing there, looking older than I remembered. Mom was clutching her shopping cart like a lifeline. "We've missed you so much," Dad said, his voice unusually gentle. "Why don't you come over for dinner sometime?" Part of me wanted to decline, to remind them of how they dismissed me years ago. But curiosity won out. "Sure," I heard myself say. "When?" The dinner was surreal. The same house, the same dining room table, but everything felt different. My parents couldn't stop praising my job at Meridian. "Investment analyst. At such a prestigious firm," Mom kept saying. "We're so proud of you, honey. James Wilson told me they only hire the best and brightest at Meridian." I could see Jessica's knuckles turning white around her fork. She'd just quit another retail job, her third that year. Over the next few years, I worked my way up at Meridian. Each promotion came with new responsibilities and challenges, which I tackled head-on. My parents started inviting me to regular family dinners, and I accepted occasionally, maintaining a careful distance while allowing them back into my life. Jessica continued her pattern of short-lived jobs and longer periods of unemployment, never leaving our parents' house. She'd work as a waitress for a few months, then quit because it was beneath her. She'd try reception work, then leave because it was too boring. Everything changed again at one of our family gatherings. Jessica burst through the front door, dragging along a tall, well-dressed man in his 30s. "Everyone, this is Charles," she announced triumphantly. "My boyfriend." Charles was polite and well-spoken, clearly from money. Jessica spent the entire evening shooting smug looks my way. "See," she finally said during dinner, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I bet you didn't expect me to find someone before you did, Miss Career Woman." I just shrugged and took another bite of Mom's pot roast. Jessica's attempt to get under my skin felt childish, especially given everything I'd achieved. My parents, however, were completely smitten with Charles. They hung on his every word about his family's real estate empire and his private school education. When he left that evening, promising to take Jessica to some fancy restaurant the following weekend, Mom pulled me aside. "Isn't it wonderful?" she whispered excitedly. "Charles comes from such a good family. They own half the commercial properties downtown. Jessica's finally found her path to success." I didn't bother pointing out that dating a rich man wasn't exactly a career achievement. Some things never changed. My big break at Meridian Financial came when I spotted a critical error in one of our major investment portfolios. The senior analysts had overlooked a pattern of high-risk investments that could have cost our clients millions. I stayed up 3 nights straight, analyzing data and preparing a comprehensive report. Ms. Mitchell, this is remarkable, Mr. Davidson, our CEO, said during the emergency meeting I'd called. How did you catch this? I noticed inconsistencies in the risk assessment models, I explained, walking them through my findings. If we redistribute these investments now, we can not only avoid losses, but potentially increase returns by 12%. My strategy worked better than anyone expected. Within 6 months, the restructured portfolio showed a 15% increase in returns. Clients were thrilled, and Meridian's reputation soared. I followed this success by developing a new investment algorithm that helped identify emerging market opportunities before our competitors. Then came the day that changed everything. I was called into the boardroom, expecting another routine meeting. Tiffany, Mr. Davidson began, we're creating a new position of investment director, and we want you to fill it. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Investment director? That would put me in charge of all investment strategies for the firm. It was a massive promotion, skipping several traditional career steps. The first people I called were Grandma and Grandpa. They were beside themselves with happiness and pride. I shared the news with my parents at our next family dinner. To my surprise, they seemed genuinely excited. This calls for a celebration, Mom declared. You must have a party. I was thinking of reserving a private room at La Maison, I said, referring to an upscale restaurant downtown. I could invite the whole family and... Oh, no, Mom interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. You should have it here. Your father and I will help organize everything. It will be much more personal, more special. I'll invite all the relatives, order catering from that wonderful place on Oak Street. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself agreeing. Over the next week, I transferred money to my mother's account for the party expenses, and she kept me updated with regular phone calls. The evening started with such promise. I arrived at my parents' house wearing my favorite black cocktail dress and pearl necklace, a graduation gift from my grandparents. The house was beautifully decorated, with fresh flowers on every surface and elegant place settings at the dining table. The caterers had outdone themselves, the aroma of gourmet food filled the air. Family members were already there, mingling in small groups. My grandparents gave me warm hugs, Aunt Susan kissed my cheek, Uncle Robert patted my shoulder. Jessica was holding court in the living room, wearing a stunning blue designer dress, with Charles by her side in an expensive suit. Once all the guests had arrived, we gathered around the large dining table. I stood up, champagne glass in hand, ready to make my announcement. I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight, I began. Oh, sweetie, let me. Mom jumped up, cutting me off mid-sentence. Her voice was almost singing with excitement, but not for the reason I expected. We've gathered here today, she announced, beaming at the assembled family members, to celebrate a wonderful occasion. Our beautiful Jessica and her wonderful Charles are engaged to be married. The room erupted in gasps and congratulations. Jessica pretended to blush while showing off a massive diamond ring I hadn't noticed before. Charles smiled proudly beside her. I fell back into my chair, my champagne glass nearly slipping from my numb fingers. This couldn't be happening. The party I had paid for, my promotion celebration, had been hijacked for Jessica's engagement announcement. Looking around the table in disbelief, I saw nothing but genuine happiness on everyone's faces. Even my grandparents were smiling and congratulating the happy couple. That's when it hit me, none of them knew this was supposed to be my celebration. My parents had invited them to an engagement party, not a promotion party. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood up, anger burning in my throat. But before I could say anything, I felt my father's iron grip on my wrist. He pulled me close, his smile never wavering for the benefit of the guests, but his whispered words were ice cold. Don't you dare make a scene, he hissed through clenched teeth. If you ruin this for your sister, we'll cut you off completely. No inheritance, no family, nothing. Sit down and smile. I yanked my hand away from my father's grip. No, I said, my voice cutting through the cheerful chatter. Everyone needs to know the truth. The room fell silent. Jessica's smug smile froze on her face. This party, I continued, my voice growing stronger, was supposed to be celebrating my promotion to investment director at Meridian Financial. I paid for everything, the food, the decorations, all of it. My parents took my money and turned my celebration into an engagement party for Jessica without telling me. Gasps and whispers filled the room. Aunt Susan's hand flew to her mouth in shock. That's not true. Mom tried to interrupt, her face flushing red. Tiffany, stop this nonsense right now. Show them the invitation, Aunt Susan, I said calmly. What does it say? Aunt Susan fumbled in her purse and pulled out the cream-colored card. It says join us in celebrating the engagement of Jessica Mitchell and Charles Aldridge. Charles stood up slowly, his face darkening. You told me this was a family dinner where you'd announce our engagement. You never said anything about stealing your sister's celebration. Charlie, baby, let me explain, Jessica started, but he cut her off. No, I've seen enough. He turned to me. I'm sorry, Tiffany, I had no idea. Then he looked at Jessica. This engagement is off. I won't be part of a family that treats people this way. Look what you've done, Jessica shrieked at me as Charles walked out. You've ruined everything. You're just jealous, because I found someone and you're still alone. Jealous? I laughed incredulously. I'm the investment director of a major financial firm. I don't need to steal someone else's party or trap a rich man into marriage to feel successful. That's enough, Dad roared, standing up. You've gone too far, Tiffany. You're no longer part of this family. Consider yourself disinherited. Fine by me, I said, but before I could continue, Grandpa's voice boomed across the table. Actually, David, he said, standing up with Grandma, your inheritance won't matter much. Eleanor and I have already changed our will. Everything we have is going to Tiffany. What? Mom gasped. She's the only one in this family with any integrity, Grandma added, her voice firm. We've watched for years as you favored Jessica and pushed Tiffany aside. No more. The evening devolved into chaos after that. Relatives began leaving in embarrassed hurries, Jessica ran upstairs in tears, and my parents stood in stunned silence. I picked up my purse and walked to the door, holding my head high. Goodbye, I said, not looking back. Don't contact me again. That was 3 years ago. I haven't spoken to my parents or Jessica since that night. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica still lives at home, bitter about losing Charles and his money. My parents tried to reach out once or twice, but I blocked their numbers. My grandparents, though, remain my rocks. We have dinner together every Sunday, and they're more proud of my achievements than my parents ever were. Sometimes I think about that night and realize it was the best thing that could have happened. It freed me from seeking approval from people who would never truly give it. Last week, I was named the youngest CEO in Meridian Financial's history. When I told my grandparents, Grandma cried happy tears, and Grandpa opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. To authenticity, he toasted, and to finding your own path. I raised my glass and smiled. Finally, I was exactly where I was meant to be. I remember my childhood as a time of contrasts. While most kids complained about their parents working too much, I had to listen to my mom's daily litany about how she hated her job. Every evening was the same. She'd come home from the accounting firm, throw her bag on the kitchen counter, and start venting. Amanda, you won't believe what my boss said today, she'd begin, barely taking off her coat. He had the nerve to question my quarterly reports. Me, I'd been doing this job for 15 years. I was only 10 at the time, but even then, I could see how different my parents were. Dad, who managed a retail chain, would just shake his head and keep eating his dinner. He was always the practical one. Sarah, he'd say to Mom, using his calm voice that somehow made her even more agitated, if you hate it so much, find another job. Another job? She'd scoff. I don't want another job, Mark. I want no job. I want to be home, living the life I deserve. Dad would usually chuckle at this point, which never failed to send Mom into a fresh spiral of complaints. You think it's funny? You think it's amusing that your wife is miserable? I learned to tune out these conversations, focusing instead on whatever book I was reading or homework I had to finish. But everything changed when we got that call about Uncle Jerry. I still remember that evening clearly. Dad was unusually quiet during dinner, and Mom was going through her usual routine of complaints when he finally interrupted her. Jerry died, he said simply, putting down his fork. Mom stopped mid-sentence. Your Uncle Jerry? Was there, did he leave anything? Dad sighed heavily. He left his estate to his nephews. I'm one of them. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. How much? $200,000. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my mother's face transform, the perpetual frown lines smoothed out, her eyes widened, and a smile I'd never seen before spread across her face. Mark, she whispered, reaching across the table to grab his hand, do you know what this means? We could buy that vacation house I've been talking about, or... No, Dad cut her off firmly. Remember all those times you said you wanted to be free? Well, here's our chance. I'm going to start my own business. A business? Mom's voice rose an octave. But Mark. A courier company, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. I'd been researching it for years. With this capital, we could make it work. You could quit your job and help me run it. We'd be our own bosses. Mom's face went through a series of expressions, disappointment, calculation, and finally, resignation mixed with hope. Fine, she said eventually. But I get to be the accountant. And when we start making money, I want nice things, Mark. Real nice things. Dad smiled and squeezed her hand. Deal. The first 3 years were tough. Dad worked crazy hours getting his courier company off the ground, while Mom handled the books. I spent a lot of time at the office after school, watching them build something from nothing. Despite the long hours, there was an energy in the air, a sense of possibility that made even the difficult days feel worthwhile. Then, almost exactly 3 years in, everything changed. The business started turning real profit, and suddenly we were living a completely different life. We moved from our modest house to a fancy new place in the expensive part of town. Dad bought 2 Mercedes for himself and Mom. But the biggest change wasn't in our surroundings, it was in my mother. I'm done, she announced one morning over breakfast. Mark, I'm quitting the company. I don't want to work anymore. Dad just nodded, like he'd been expecting this. Okay, honey. We can hire another accountant. I nearly choked on my cereal. Just like that? Just like that, Mom smiled, already scrolling through her phone. Oh look, Melissa just got back from Paris. I should call her. Melissa was one of Mom's new friends, all wealthy businesswomen who spent their days shopping and planning their next vacation. Her old friends, the ones who'd been around when we were normal, started disappearing from her life one by one. While Mom was reinventing herself, I started spending more time with Dad at the office. I tried to learn about the business, thinking maybe I'd take over someday, but my heart wasn't in it. Dad, I said one afternoon, watching him review delivery routes, what if I told you I don't want to run the company when I grow up? I think I want to be a dentist. Instead of looking disappointed, his face lit up. Really? Tell me more about that. So I did. I told him about the biology classes I loved, about how fascinating I found dental procedures, about my dream of having my own practice someday. He listened to everything, asking questions, and showing genuine interest. Meanwhile, Mom was barely home anymore. She was always off somewhere, Aspen, Cabo, the Maldives, with her new friends. I lost count of how many times I asked to go with her. "Mom, can I come on your trip to Europe next month?" I asked one day, watching her pack another new suitcase. She didn't even look up. "Oh honey, no. These trips are my time to get away from, well, everything. When you're older, you'll realize how exhausting family life can be." I wanted to point out that she didn't actually participate in family life anymore, she was too busy recovering from it. But I just walked away. What was the point? The mother who used to help me with homework and make chocolate chip pancakes on Sundays was gone, replaced by this stranger who cared more about her designer handbags than her daughter. High school graduation came and went, and before I knew it, I was packing my bags for dental school in another state. Dad helped me move into my dorm, setting up my room with the same careful attention he gave to everything in his life. Mom didn't come to help me move in. She was in the Bahamas with her friends, celebrating someone's new yacht. Every Sunday at 7 p.m., I'd call home. Dad would appear on screen immediately, eager to hear about my classes, my friends, my life. He'd lean in close to the camera, hanging on every word about dental procedures and anatomy lessons. Mom, when she bothered to join the calls, would hover in the background, usually scrolling through her phone. It became our routine. Sometimes Mom wouldn't show up at all, and those were actually my favorite calls, just Dad and me, talking about everything and nothing. Then came the call that changed everything. "Amanda," Dad's voice was different that Sunday. "I need to tell you something." I knew from his tone that whatever was coming wasn't good. But nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. "It's cancer. And it's aggressive." The world tilted on its axis. "What? No, that's impossible. You're healthy, you." 6 months, maybe less, he cut me off gently. "I'm selling the company. Neither you nor your mother could run it, and I want everything settled before." He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Those 6 months were a blur. I tried to split my time between school and home, watching helplessly as my father, my rock, my best friend, withered away before my eyes. He sold the company quickly, thank God, so at least he didn't have to worry about that in his final weeks. Mom fluttered around during his illness, playing the part of the devoted wife whenever anyone was watching. But I caught the calculating look she'd give his medication schedule, the way she'd check his business papers when she thought no one was looking. A month after selling the company, Dad slipped away quietly in his sleep. I was holding his hand when it happened. Mom was at a spa. The funeral was a production worthy of Broadway. Mom sobbed dramatically, clutching at the arms of her friends, barely able to stand. She looked the perfect picture of a grieving widow in her designer black dress and tastefully subtle makeup. But the moment the last guest left, it was like someone had flipped a switch. She straightened up, wiped her eyes, and walked to the mirror to fix her mascara. "Well," she said, suddenly businesslike, "that's done. Now we need to talk about the money." I stared at her, unable to process the transformation. "Mom, Dad just died." "I know, honey, and it's terrible," she said, not sounding terrible at all. "But life goes on. And just think what we could do with the money from the company sale. I've had my eye on this gorgeous villa in Spain." Then there was the reading of the will. The notary's office was cold and sterile, nothing like Dad's warm presence. Mom sat next to me in a black designer dress, different from the funeral one, of course, tapping her manicured nails against her leather handbag. Mr. Peterson, Dad's longtime lawyer and friend, cleared his throat and began reading. Being of sound mind, his voice droned on with the legal preliminaries until he got to the meat of it. "The family house is to be divided equally between my wife, Sarah Thompson, and my daughter, Amanda Thompson." Mom's tapping stopped. "Furthermore, I have established a trust fund for Amanda's continued education in dentistry, covering all expenses until the completion of her degree." I could feel Mom's tension building beside me. "The remaining assets, including proceeds from the sale of the business, are to be divided as follows: 60% to my daughter, Amanda Thompson, and 40% to my wife, Sarah Thompson." The tapping resumed, faster now, almost violent. This is ridiculous, Mom burst out before Mr. Peterson could continue. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Peterson said quietly. Mark was very clear about his wishes. Mom turned to me, her face a mask of calculated sympathy. Amanda, honey, you have to see how unfair this is. Your education is already being paid for, and you'll make plenty of money once you're a dentist. I'm your mother, I need this money to maintain my lifestyle. Maybe try spending less? The words came out before I could stop them. Her face transformed instantly, the sympathetic mask dropping away to reveal raw fury. How dare you? After everything I've sacrificed for you? What exactly have you sacrificed, Mom? You haven't worked in years. You've been on permanent vacation while Dad built everything we have. I don't have to listen to this. She stood up, gathering her designer purse and jacket. When you decide to stop being selfish and ungrateful, you know where to find me. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the diplomas on Mr. Peterson's wall. Your father knew this might happen, Mr. Peterson said gently. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Days turned into weeks. No calls, no texts, no emails. The silence was deafening, but also strangely peaceful. I threw myself into my studies, trying to make Dad proud, trying not to think about Mom's reaction or what it said about her, about us. She'll get over it, I told myself as I reviewed dental anatomy charts late at night. She'll calm down eventually. But deep down, I knew something had broken in that notary's office, something that had been cracking for years. And unlike the broken bones and damaged teeth I was learning to fix in school, this wasn't something that could be mended with study or skill or science. One day I was taking a study break, mindlessly scrolling through social media, when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at, Mom, tanned and glowing, wrapped in the arms of a man who couldn't be more than 35. The caption beneath the photo stopped my heart, finally married to my soulmate. Newlyweds, love wins. My phone slipped from my numb fingers. Married? Without telling me? I tried calling her immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the right numbers. Straight to voicemail, of course. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of them together kept playing in my head, along with 1,000 questions. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I packed a small bag and caught the first flight home. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it after the funeral, Dad's rosebushes still perfectly trimmed, his favorite chair visible through the living room window. The only difference was the shiny red Porsche in the driveway that definitely hadn't been there before. Mom opened the door wearing a silk robe I'd never seen before. Her surprised expression quickly turned to anger. Amanda, what are you doing here? Her voice was ice cold. I saw your post, I managed to say. You got married? No one invited you here, she snapped, but before she could close the door, a man appeared behind her, the one from the photo. Up close, he looked even younger. Babe, who is it? He asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. Nobody important, Mom replied. Just my daughter who doesn't know how to call before showing up. I felt like I'd been slapped. Your daughter who didn't even know you got married? My personal life is none of your business, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. None of my. Mom, Dad's only been gone 3 months. She laughed then, a harsh sound that held no humor. Oh, sweetie, Brad and I have known each other for years. Why do you think I took all those solo vacations? Those trips were boring. Brad made them very interesting, didn't you, darling? He smirked, pulling her closer. I felt sick. How could you do this to Dad? My voice was barely a whisper. Your father was boring, she shot back. Always work, work, work. Brad knows how to have fun. Now, I suggest you leave before I call the police. This is my house now, and you're not welcome here. This is half my house, I reminded her. Dad left it to both of us. Get out, she screamed, her composed facade cracking. Get out of my house. Go back to your precious studies and your perfect little life that your father bought you." I backed away, tears blurring my vision. The last thing I saw before the door slammed was Brad pulling Mom into a kiss, both of them laughing. I made it to my rental car before the sobs came. All those trips, all those times she said she needed breaks from the family. How long had she been living this double life? How long had she been betraying Dad, betraying all of us? Another month has passed. I was in the middle of a dental anatomy class when my phone buzzed. Mrs. Jenkins, our old neighbor who'd lived next door for 15 years, was calling. Odd, she never called. "Amanda, honey," her voice was hesitant. "I thought you should know, there are moving trucks at your house. Your mother is selling it." The words didn't make sense at first. "That's impossible. The house is half mine." "Well, there's a sold sign in the yard, and they're clearing everything out." My hands were shaking as I dialed Mom's number, expecting the usual silence. To my surprise, she answered on the first ring. Well, if it isn't my studious daughter." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Mom, what's this about selling the house?" She laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, that. Yes, Brad and I got a fantastic price for it. We're moving to Mexico, the weather's so much better there." "You can't sell the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's half mine. Dad left it to both of us." "Funny thing about that," she said, sounding almost gleeful. "It turns out it's pretty easy to forge a signature. Just a few practice runs, and voila. The house is sold." The world tilted sideways. You forged my signature?" "Mom, that's fraud. That's a crime." "Oh please," she scoffed. "If you hadn't been so selfish with your father's money, I wouldn't have had to do this. Brad and I deserve to enjoy life. Speaking of which, I just bought him the most gorgeous Jaguar. He's so happy with it." "He's happy with your money, Mom. That's all he cares about." "You little brat," she spat. "You're just jealous, because I have a gorgeous young husband who adores me, while you're all alone with your boring books and your little dental tools. What do you know about love?" "I know Dad loved you," I said quietly. "He loved you for 30 years, and this is how you repay him?" "Your father?" She laughed again, harsher this time. "Your precious father, who left you more money than me. Who treated me like I was some kind of trophy wife. Well, now I have a real trophy, a young, handsome husband who knows how to have fun. And guess what? We don't care about your American laws in Mexico. We don't care about you, or your inheritance, or anything else. We're going to live the life I deserve. Mom, please. Face it, Amanda. You're just a sad, lonely little girl who's jealous of her mother's happiness. When was the last time you even had a date? Too busy playing with teeth to have a real life, aren't you?" Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there in the empty classroom, my phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence. My mother had just admitted to committing fraud. She had stolen my inheritance, my home, everything I had left of Dad. And she was proud of it. Life has a funny way of moving forward, with or without you. In the years following Mom's disappearance to Mexico, I finished dental school, completed my residency, and started working at a respected clinic. Dad's inheritance helped me buy a beautiful apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and I was building the life I'd always dreamed of. I thought about Mom sometimes, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep. I wondered if she was happy with her choices, if her young husband was worth destroying her family for. But mostly, I tried not to think about her at all. Then one ordinary Tuesday evening, as I was unwinding after a long day at the clinic, my doorbell rang. I wasn't prepared for what I saw through the peephole. There stood my mother, but not the perfectly coiffed, designer-clad woman I remembered. This woman was haggard, wearing wrinkled clothes that had seen better days. Her once immaculate hair was graying at the roots, and her expensive makeup was nowhere to be seen. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Amanda, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Baby, please. What are you doing here? My voice came out harder than I expected. She pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes darting around desperately. I need your help, Brad. She choked back a sob. He took everything. Everything? I couldn't help the hint of satisfaction in my voice. All the money, the house money, what was left of the inheritance. He spent it all on gambling and parties in Mexico. And then, she wrapped her arms around herself. Then he met some 20-year-old at a club. They ran off together. Took the Jaguar, took what little money was left. I stood there, watching her cry, feeling nothing but satisfaction. I used my last dollars to fly back here, she continued. Amanda, I know I made mistakes, but I'm your mother. Let me stay here with you, please. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, surprising us both. Stay here? With me? Why are you laughing? Her face darkened. This isn't funny. I have nowhere else to go. Maybe you should have thought about that before you forged my signature and stole my house, I said, my laughter dying away. I was wrong, she wailed, falling onto my couch. I know that now. I'm sorry. Please, Amanda, I'm your mother. No, I said quietly. You stopped being my mother the day Dad died. Maybe even before that. I want you to leave. She shot to her feet, tears instantly replaced by rage. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for you. Everything you've done to me, I corrected. Now get out. You can't do this to me, she screamed, mascara running down her cheeks. I'll tell everyone what a horrible daughter you are. I'll tell them how you left your poor mother homeless. What will your fancy doctor friends think about that? As my mother's threats echoed through my apartment, I calmly pulled out my phone. Sometimes the best weapons aren't weapons at all, they're just the truth, preserved at the right moment. Before you continue with your threats, I said quietly, there's something you should hear. I pressed play, and her own voice filled the room, younger, more confident, dripping with that familiar mockery from years ago. Oh please. If you hadn't been so selfish with your father's money, I wouldn't have had to do this. It turns out it's pretty easy to forge a signature. Just a few practice runs, and voila. The house is sold. The color drained from my mother's face as she listened to her past self confess to fraud. Her legs gave out, and she sank back onto my couch. You recorded that call? Dad taught me to always be prepared, I said, stopping the playback. He also taught me about consequences, something you never seemed to understand. You wouldn't, she whispered, but the uncertainty in her voice was clear. Wouldn't I? Fraud is a federal crime, Mom. Forging documents for financial gain? That's years in prison. I'm sure the police would be very interested in this recording. She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not manipulation, not calculation, genuine fear. I'll leave, she said quickly. I'll go. Just, don't. Don't what? Turn you in? Like you were just threatening to turn everyone against me? I leaned closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out that door, and you're never going to contact me again. No calls, no visits, no messages through friends. If I ever hear from you again, this recording goes straight to the FBI. She stood on shaky legs, clutching her worn purse to her chest. At the door, she turned back one last time. Amanda, I'm still your mother. No, I said softly. You're just a woman who gave birth to me. My mother died a long time ago, probably around the time she started cheating on my father at those resorts. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, then hurried out the door. I stood there for a long time after she left, listening to the silence of my apartment. Then I walked to my bedroom and pulled out an old photo album, one of the few things I'd managed to save before she sold the house. There was a picture of us from when I was little, Mom, Dad, and me at the beach, all smiling, all happy. I touched Dad's face gently. I miss you, I whispered. Then I closed the album and put it away. I don't know what happened to my mother after that day. I don't know if she found somewhere to live, if she ever rebuilt her life, if she ever truly regretted what she'd done. Sometimes people ask about her, and I simply say we're not in touch. The truth is, I don't want to know. The woman in that photo album, the mother who once loved me, is gone. The stranger who showed up at my door that day? She's not my problem anymore. From my earliest memories, I knew I was a disappointment. Not that my parents ever said it directly, they didn't have to. The way they looked at me when I was born, hoping for their first son, and then again when my sister Kate arrived 3 years later, told me everything I needed to know. I was Jenna, their firstborn daughter, and I would never be enough. Maybe the next one will be a boy, I overheard Mom telling Dad after Kate was born. But there wasn't going to be a next one. Complications during Kate's birth meant Mom couldn't have any more children. Their dreams of having a son were put on hold, transferred to some distant future when their daughters might give them grandsons instead. Growing up in our modest suburban home, I watched as Kate quickly figured out how to wrap our parents around her little finger. She'd bat those big brown eyes of hers, and they'd melt like ice cream on a hot summer day. Meanwhile, I grew more independent, learning to rely on myself rather than chase after attention I was never going to get. Kate knew exactly what buttons to push to get what she wanted. I had everything I needed: clothes, food, shelter, education, but emotional warmth was always in short supply, at least for me. Over time, I learned to accept it, to build my own internal fortress of self-reliance. I'm going to study economics, I announced at dinner during my senior year of high school. Mom and Dad exchanged looks across the table. Are you sure, honey? Mom asked, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. That's such a technical field. Dad nodded in agreement. What about something more suitable for a young lady? Teaching, maybe? Or nursing? I stood my ground. I've already been accepted to State University. My grades are good enough for a partial scholarship. Well, Mom sighed, I suppose it's your choice. The disappointment in her voice was familiar by now, almost comforting in its predictability. Kate, who was still in high school, smirked from across the table. I'm thinking of studying psychology, she announced, and our parents immediately brightened. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Mom exclaimed. You've always been so good with people. I pushed my peas around my plate, letting their voices wash over me like background noise. I'd learned long ago that fighting for their approval was a losing battle. Instead, I focused on my future, on the independence that college would bring. I met James during my sophomore year at State University. He was a senior in the economics department, and we literally bumped into each other in the library's financial section. I dropped my statistics textbook, he picked it up, and that's how our story began. You're in Professor Martinez's macro class, right? He asked, handing me back my book. I've seen you asking all the smart questions. I blushed, not used to anyone noticing me in a positive way. Yeah, that's me. The annoying one who keeps the class running late. Not annoying at all, he smiled. Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime? I could tell you about the upper-level courses you'll be taking next year. That coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into movie nights, which turned into us being inseparable. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated. James didn't compare me to anyone else, he just liked me for who I was. After he graduated, James took a job at Anderson Consulting while I finished my degree. He waited for me, and the moment I graduated, we decided to move in together. We found a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Mom, Dad, this is James, I said during his first visit to my parents' house. The change in their attitude was immediate and shocking. Oh, James, Mom practically squealed. We're so happy to finally meet you. Will you be joining us for Thanksgiving? Christmas, both? Dad clapped him on the shoulder. Son, we've heard so much about you. Tell me about your job. Jenna says you're in finance? The word son caught my attention. Of course, they were finally getting the son they'd always wanted, even if it was through marriage. I watched as they fawned over James, asking him about his plans for the future and when he thought he might want to settle down. Kate, who was living at home after graduating and still hadn't found a serious boyfriend, sat in the corner during these family gatherings, shooting daggers at us with her eyes. For once, I was the sister who had something she wanted, and she couldn't stand it. After a year of living together, during a quiet dinner at home, James got down on one knee and proposed. I said yes immediately, and we decided on a small, intimate wedding, despite my parents' protests about wanting something more elaborate. "It's your big day," Mom argued. "Don't you want something more special?" "This is special," I insisted. "It's exactly what we want." The ceremony was perfect, just close friends and family in a small garden venue. James and I exchanged vows, had a lovely dinner reception, and went back to our apartment as husband and wife. It felt right, starting our married life in the same place where we'd begun building our life together. The questions started almost immediately after the honeymoon. "So, when can we expect some good news?" Mom would ask, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed desperation for a grandson. "We're saving for a house first," I'd explain, again and again. "We want to be financially stable before starting a family." Dad would shake his head disapprovingly. "Your mother and I didn't have much when we started out, and we managed just fine." Every family dinner became an update on their friends' growing families. "Did you hear? The Hendersons just became grandparents again, another boy," or "the Smith's daughter just announced she's pregnant, and she's younger than you, Jenna." Finally, after 2 years of saving, James and I bought our first house. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours, well, ours and the bank's. The moment we signed those mortgage papers, I knew the baby questions would intensify. And they did. What I hadn't expected was Kate's announcement just 3 months later. "I'm pregnant," she declared during Sunday dinner, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "It's Mark's." Mark was her boyfriend of 6 months, a guy none of us particularly liked. The next few months were a whirlwind. Mark disappeared as soon as Kate started showing, leaving her alone and moving back in with our parents. But instead of this being a scandal or shame, my parents transformed their house into a shrine to their upcoming grandchild. When little Emily was born, you'd have thought she was royalty. My parents converted Kate's old room into a nursery, bought every baby item imaginable, and basically turned their lives upside down to help raise their granddaughter. "Isn't she perfect?" Mom would coo, rocking Emily during our visits. "Don't you just want one of your own, Jenna?" What hurt more than my parents' constant pressure was watching James with Emily. He'd get down on the floor to play with her, make silly faces, and spend hours entertaining her with stuffed animals and children's books. "James is such a natural with children," Mom would say pointedly. "He's going to make such a wonderful father." I started monitoring my cycle, taking vitamins, and doing everything the pregnancy websites recommended. Month after month, we tried. And month after month, nothing happened. Meanwhile, James spent more and more time at my parents' house, playing with Emily. "She's such a sweet kid," he'd say on our drives home. "Did you see how she's starting to walk now? And she almost said uncle today." "You're so good with her," my mother would praise him. "Just imagine how wonderful you'll be with your own children." I'd smile and nod, but inside, a knot of anxiety was growing. Why wasn't I pregnant yet? What if something was wrong? But I pushed these thoughts aside, telling myself it would happen when it was meant to happen. After a year of trying with no success, I was still trying to stay positive. These things take time, I'd tell myself. But when Mom found out we'd been actively trying for a year, she went into full panic mode. "A whole year? Jenna, something's wrong. You need to see a doctor immediately." She started forwarding me contact information for fertility specialists before I'd even left their house that day. Finally, to get everyone off my back, I made an appointment. James came with me, holding my hand in the sterile exam room as the doctor ran through her questions. Blood tests, ultrasounds, and more tests followed. Then came the day of the results. "I'm sorry," the doctor said gently, "but the tests indicate that you're infertile." The words hit me like a physical blow. James squeezed my hand, but I barely felt it. The doctor kept talking about options and treatments, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. That evening, James and I sat in our kitchen, barely touching our takeout dinner. "We can look into adoption or IVF," he said finally. "There are options." I nodded numbly, but the devastation felt complete. How could I face my family with this news? The answer came at the next family dinner. I decided to just get it over with, like ripping off a band-aid. "Mom, Dad," I said during a lull in the conversation, "I need to tell you something. I saw a specialist and I took a deep breath. I can't have children. I'm infertile." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Mom's face contorted with disgust. "Infertile?" She spat the word like it was poison. "What kind of woman can't even do the one thing she's meant to do?" Dad wouldn't even look at me. "An empty vessel," he muttered. "Just an empty flower." Kate sat there smirking, bouncing Emily on her knee. "Well, I guess we know who the real woman in the family is." I looked at James, desperate for support, but he just sat there, staring at his plate. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. I pushed back from the table and ran out of the house, ignoring their calls behind me. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to go back to their house. But James kept going, spending time with Emily, chatting with Kate, listening to my parents. He'd come home full of stories. "Emily learned a new song today," he'd say. "You should have seen her dancing around the living room." Or, "Kate made this amazing lasagna. She's really getting good at cooking." Each word felt like a knife in my heart. I'd lie awake at night, listening to James's steady breathing beside me, wondering if he resented me for not being able to give him children. The guilt ate at me constantly, made worse every time he came home from another visit to my parents' house, with that wistful look in his eyes after playing with Emily. It was a regular Tuesday when my world fell apart. I came home early from work, my arms full of Chinese takeout, James's favorite. But the house was empty and dark. His car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual, but something felt off. I called his cell. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed, a notification from Instagram. Kate Thompson posted a new photo. I usually ignored her posts, but something made me click this time. My stomach dropped as the image loaded, James sitting on my parents' couch, Emily in his lap, and Kate pressed against his side, all three of them grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Family time with my favorite people." My hands were shaking as I grabbed my car keys. The rational part of my brain tried to argue that there could be an innocent explanation, but my gut knew better. The whole drive to my parents' house, my mind raced through every interaction between James and Kate over the past year, seeing them in a horrible new light. Their driveway was full, Mom's car, Dad's truck, James's sedan. The front door was unlocked, as always. I slipped inside quietly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. Voices drifted from the living room. "James, you know we think of you as a son already," my mother was saying. "And you deserve to be happy. You've been so wonderful with Emily," my father added. "And Kate, well, she's young, fertile. You could have more children together. Think about it," my mother continued. "Why stay trapped in a marriage with—" She lowered her voice, but I could still hear the disgust. "A barren woman?" I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. I burst into the room, making them all jump. The scene was like something from a nightmare, my parents and sister on one couch, James in Dad's armchair, Emily playing with blocks on the floor between them. One big happy family, plotting to exclude me. "What the hell is going on here?" My voice came out stronger than I felt. James at least had the decency to look ashamed, but my parents were defiant. "Jenna," Mom stood up, chin raised. "We're just having an honest discussion about what's best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" I repeated, my voice shaking. You're trying to convince my husband to leave me for my sister. Well, someone has to think about James's future, Dad shot back. You can't give him what he wants, what he deserves. Kate can. I turned to James, waiting for him to defend our marriage, to tell them they were crazy. Instead, he stared at the floor. James? My voice cracked on his name. I'm sorry, Jenna, he said quietly. But they're right. I want children, a family. And I've developed feelings for Kate. Kate smirked, reaching out to put her hand on James's arm. Get out, you don't belong here anymore. This is my family now. I looked at each of their faces, my father's stern disapproval, my mother's cold satisfaction, Kate's triumphant smile, James's guilty avoidance. For years of marriage, a lifetime of family ties, all meaningless. Without another word, I turned and walked out. I drove home in a daze, packed a suitcase on autopilot, and left a note for James, file for divorce. I'll have my lawyer contact yours. The divorce was quick and clinical. We split everything down the middle. I found a small apartment across town and threw myself into my work, trying to forget. But social media had other plans. One morning, my coworker gasped at her phone during coffee break. Oh my God, Jenna, I'm so sorry, I forgot to unfollow your sister. She tried to hide her screen, but I'd already seen it, Kate in a massive white dress, James in a tux, my parents beaming beside them. It's fine, I said, even though it wasn't. I hope they're very happy together. A year later, another announcement popped up, welcome baby Rose. My replacement had produced the daughter they'd always wanted. James now had his perfect little family, Emily, who he'd adopted, and his new baby with Kate. I deleted all my social media accounts that day. Life has a funny way of surprising you, though. I was shopping for groceries one Saturday when my cart collided with someone else's. I am so sorry, a deep voice said. I looked up into the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. I'm Michael, he said, helping me pick up my scattered items. Can I buy you coffee to apologize for being a klutz? One coffee turned into dinner, dinner into dating, and suddenly I was falling in love again. But this time I was honest from the start. I need to tell you something, I said one night, 6 months into our relationship. I can't have children. I'm infertile. Michael took my hands in his. Jenna, I love you. If we want kids someday, we'll adopt. Or we won't. I just want you. We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, just us and a few close friends. No family drama, no expensive dress, no expectations, just love. A year into our marriage, I started feeling strange. Nauseous in the mornings, dizzy at odd times. Michael insisted I see a doctor. Mrs. Chen, the doctor said, looking at my test results. Congratulations, you're pregnant. I stared at her. That's impossible. I'm infertile, I have the tests to prove it. She smiled gently. The human body is mysterious. Sometimes, despite all odds, pregnancy occurs even in cases of diagnosed infertility. It's rare, but it happens. Michael and I cried together that night, tears of joy, of disbelief, of hope. I didn't tell my family. They'd lost the right to share in my happiness. 9 months later, I held my son in my arms. 7 pounds, 6 ounces of perfect, beautiful boy. Michael and I named him Alexander, defender of mankind. Looking at his tiny face, I felt nothing but pure love. No bitterness, no regret, no anger. Life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Alexander was 2, Michael was the perfect father, and I had everything I'd ever wanted. We rarely ate out, preferring quiet family dinners at home, but that night Michael had gotten a promotion, so we decided to celebrate at La Maison, an upscale French restaurant downtown. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no, there was Kate, my sister, locked in an intimate embrace with a man who definitely wasn't James. They were tucked away in a corner booth, but not well enough hidden. She was running her fingers through his hair, kissing him deeply, completely oblivious to the world around them. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone and discreetly took several photos. The lighting was dim, but the pictures were clear enough, there was no mistaking what was happening. "Jenna?" Michael touched my arm. "Are you okay? You've gone pale." I showed him the photos. "That's Kate. With someone who isn't her husband." Michael's jaw tightened. He knew our whole history, knew what Kate and James had done to me. "Are you going to send those to him?" My finger hovered over the send button. It would be so easy. One click and I could blow up their perfect little family, just like they'd blown up mine. But no, I said finally, saving the photos to a secure folder instead. I'm better than them. A year passed. Alexander was growing into a brilliant, beautiful little boy with Michael's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. We were visiting a friend who lived in my old neighborhood, something I rarely did, and decided to take advantage of the nice weather by walking to a nearby park. That's when it happened. Just our luck, as we rounded the corner by the local supermarket, there they were, Mom, Dad, Kate, and James, loading groceries into their car. They saw us at the same moment we saw them. Their initial reaction was to turn away, noses in the air, pretending we were strangers. But then their eyes fell on Alexander, who was holding my hand and chattering away about the toy truck he'd brought to play with at the park. Mom stopped dead in her tracks. Who is this?" I could have ignored them. Should have, probably. But something made me stop. "This is my son, Alexander." My voice was steady, calm. Kate let out a harsh laugh. "Oh please. We all know you can't have children. Which agency did you adopt him from?" I looked her straight in the eye, enjoying the moment. "I gave birth to him 3 years ago. No adoption agency involved." "That's impossible," Mom sputtered. "The doctors said." "The doctors were wrong," I cut her off. "It happens sometimes. Rare, but it happens. And here's the proof." I gestured to Alexander, who was watching the strangers curiously. Dad's eyes went wide. "A grandson? We have a grandson?" They moved toward us then, Mom's arms outstretched like she had every right in the world to embrace my child. I stepped in front of Alexander, protectively. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to throw me away like garbage and then claim my son as your grandson. You lost that privilege when you betrayed me." Kate's face had turned an ugly shade of red as she watched our parents' attention focus on my son. She'd always been the favorite after I was cast aside, and she couldn't stand seeing that shift. "Oh, get over yourself, Jenna," she spat. "So you managed to pop out one kid. Big deal. I still won in the end. I got your husband, I gave him a real family. 2 beautiful daughters. Face it, I'm still better than you'll ever be." My hand was already on my phone before she finished her rant. "Speaking of family, Kate, why don't you tell everyone about your extracurricular activities?" "What are you talking about?" James asked, his eyes narrowing. I pulled up the photos from the restaurant and held out my phone. "Here's your loving wife having dinner with someone else. Though I have to say, Kate, most people don't eat their dinner companion's face." The color drained from Kate's face as James snatched the phone from my hand. Mom and Dad crowded around to look, their mouths falling open in shock. "Who is he?" James demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Kate stammered, He's just a friend from work." "Friends don't kiss like that," I observed coolly. "And they certainly don't meet in dark corners of expensive restaurants while their spouses are at home with the kids." "Kate, how could you?" Mom gasped. "After everything." "Everything what?" I couldn't help but laugh. "After you helped her steal my husband? After you threw me away because you thought I couldn't have children? Karma's quite something, isn't it?" James and Kate were now screaming at each other right there in the parking lot. "Come on, sweetie," I said to Alexander, taking his hand. "Time to go home." We left them to their chaos, my son chattering happily about the park we were heading to, completely oblivious to the nuclear explosion we'd just walked away from. A month later, the community grapevine brought me the rest of the story. James, suspicious after discovering Kate's affair, had gotten himself tested. Turned out he was the one who was infertile, had been all along. Which meant baby Rose, the daughter Kate claimed was his, couldn't possibly be. He left her immediately, refusing to pay support for either Rose or Emily. Kate moved back in with our parents, her perfect life in shambles. They all tried reaching out to me after that, calls, emails, even showing up at our house unannounced. "Please, Jenna," Mom begged through the door. "We made a terrible mistake. Let us be part of Alexander's life. He's our only grandson." "You should have thought about that before you called me an empty vessel," I replied calmly. "Actions have consequences." Michael supported my decision completely. "Family isn't about DNA," he said one night as we watched Alexander playing with his blocks. "It's about love, respect, and loyalty. They showed you none of those things." He was right, of course. Looking at my little family now, my wonderful husband who loved me regardless of whether I could have children, my miracle son who proved all the doctors wrong, our home filled with laughter and joy, I knew I had everything I needed. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes you have to build your own, with people who choose you back. I chose Michael, and he chose me. We chose Alexander, and he chose us right back with his first smile, his first word, his first steps. That's what real family means. And I wouldn't have it any other way.